In today's Stigma Spotlight, we focus on stigma and suicide. It used to be that no one talked about suicide, but nowadays seems like everyone is saying things like, I might as well kill myself. What does that mean for the people who really need the help?
Let's have a conversation for you. So it used to be that nobody talked about it.
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't mean it because it was too scary to talk about.
Right. It was like taboo. I think it goes again with stigma of any mental health.
Yeah, and I think too in the past, when if somebody committed suicide, you never said that they killed themselves.
I remember in high school, there was someone, and I think I was 15 at the time, and it was like he was just gone.
Mm-hmm.
And we even as a school didn't do anything to honor him or, to talk about what does it feel like that somebody ended their life. And, now I think it's better now.
Mm-hmm.
I think schools will get the kids together and do counseling and I guess face it and address it and acknowledge it.
I think some schools, I think there are still schools that are not that forward thinking, not that progressive, to be upfront about talking about it.
So what changed, do you think, it used to be something you didn't talk about, and therefore, one of the things, that is helpful to people is to get it out, talk about your feelings, don't bottle it up.
Well, I think it goes along with people didn't talk about mental illness. So they didn't talk about mental illness, they didn't talk about suicide, they didn't talk about alcoholism, they didn't talk about sexual abuse.
Well, even cancer, they'd say cancer.
Right.
You see that as, because it was just so unpleasant, or somehow you...
Do you think that with that kid in your school, do you think people knew that there was something wrong? Do you remember?
I just remember him being a loner, not having a lot of friends. I felt badly that I had never reached out. Of course, you didn't know. He was so quiet and he wasn't in my social circles. But now that I look back on how he was behaving, it was, some of the clues were there, And he probably wasn't the type to say, I might as well just shoot myself. That sort of dramatic sort of, way of being. Because you can imagine when we were kids, if we said something like that, you would have been, don't say that, shut down.
Oh, you don't mean that.
Right. So we use the word minimizing about that. But yeah, so things have changed.
I remember when I was in high school, we had a girl who committed suicide. The same thing. We all knew something was wrong. We didn't know what was wrong. And she was a loner. She didn't really reach out to anybody or talk to anybody. And if I remember, I think, we're such a small school, we tried to engage her, and then she was gone. And it was a pretty traumatic experience, to have one of your fellow classmates commit suicide. And, I don't think they even used the word suicide. They said that she was gone, and we all knew, but nobody really openly talked about it.
Well, that's the weird thing about all of this, is at a time when people need the help the most, people are like, oh, I'll just mind my own business and I won't get involved.
Right.
It is kind of like when people have cancer. You don't want to bother them. You don't want to, but that's when they need, So partly stigma, partly fear, of just awkwardness of what do I say to someone who's that depressed? I don't want to make it worse.
Right.
I hear that a lot. So.
Well, what do you say? Do you say, talk to me, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. What's going on with you? Yeah,
I think the one of the least helpful things that people can say is, you don't mean that. You'd never do that.
Right.
That kind of to completely...
It'll be better tomorrow.
Yeah. The way I see it when I'm talking with someone about that subject is I'm sort of taking it apart. Really breaking it down. Talking about, like, what is their intent? What is their plan? Do they have access to the means? What is their history? Right.
How long have they been thinking about it?
How long? What are the stressors that they're making them? What are their coping skills?
Right.
So really taking it apart, whereas even some professionals that we work with will, say, oh, she's suicidal, and they forget to just say, okay, let's take it apart. Let's figure this out.
Right. What does this mean?
Because I can imagine that someone who's feeling that desperate feels incredibly alone. So the one thing they need probably the most is connection to someone.
And somebody who's not afraid
to talk about the subject.
To say the word suicide or kill or,
right.
And what does all that mean to you? And what are you feeling? And how long have you been feeling like this? And you're not alone, and we can help you.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I noticed, Veronica, that lately that kids especially are talking about suicide constantly. They'll make remarks that just offhand remarks like, I might as well shoot myself, or, and it's so much more than maybe we saw as when we were kids.
What do you think they're saying when they say, I want to kill myself?
I don't know. I think it's something kids have adopted as a way of dealing with stress, and I wonder sometimes if it's about the entertainment business, because we see movies and with death, and it's such a common theme. I don't know. What do you think about it?
I wonder whether, with video games and playing video games, and it's all about death, and it doesn't seem real.
Right.
It's a game.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if, kids don't really realize what they're saying, but they're surrounded by death in our culture, and, and maybe they're hearing it from other kids. Maybe they're hearing it from their shows that they're watching.
What about it being attention-seeking? Like when a parent comes and says, well, they're just saying that, she doesn't mean it.
Well, I think that when kids do say that, they're in some kind of distress. They may not mean it. They may not understand what they're saying. But I think they're in some kind of distress. And maybe that's their way of communicating distress.
So what do you think about like that old... crying wolf thing, where if you say it too much, people don't take you seriously? Do you think that happens with parents?
I think it comes back to, what are they trying to communicate? There's something bothering them. There's something that is causing distress. And maybe they have to keep saying it over and over again until somebody addresses, what is the problem? What is bothering you? What's going on in your world?
And possibly within a family that already has anxiety, say a parent has the anxiety, the child now has anxiety, maybe that parent is like, oh, I can't handle her saying that, and they just shut it down and just say, I can, and try to kind of, you know what I mean? That could be happening for parents who don't want to just,
because what we know about panic is that it's overwhelming, it's scary, and you can't take a whole lot of information in when you're in a state of panic or anxiety.
So actually, you mentioned panic. I was reading something about the fact that panic attacks are now a huge red flag for people who can be suicidal. There used to be a profile, right? We probably learned about it in school, right? White, older male, lives alone, active alcoholism, lack of supports. But now they're adding like AIDS and HIV and AIDS and panic attacks as another significant factor for people to be, suicidal.
Well, I think it's important to look at people's patterns of how they cope with problems. If they're trying to run away from their problems, or they're trying to get away from the distress.
So what would that look like, though? I mean, you mean people like quit jobs?
Yeah, they quit jobs. They'll get up and move. They'll leave their apartment.
Leave relationships and
they'll start drinking they'll start drinking. They'll use drugs to numb themselves, to not face problems because it's too overwhelming and too distressing.
So when looking at kids, because we were talking about kids before, what would that look like? That kind of pattern that you're saying?
Well, I think kids will act out. Kids will usually act out the problems in the family or whatever distress that they're feeling. And it may be, having temper tantrums or destroying the possessions in their room or
running from school,
away from school,
not facing. Right. So a person who just can't handle it. It's like they just can't handle it, so they just escape.
Right. It's about escaping. Right. Wanting out of that distress, wanting out of that discomfort.
So that person could be at more risk for suicidal behavior because they're like, I'm out. Death is a better option.
Right. And I think too, you want to look at family. Is there suicide in the family? Because has a family member at some point in that family tree introduced suicide as a coping mechanism? And then what happens is that becomes a way to cope, as unhealthy as it is.
So, do you think that beyond looking at that old profile that we're used to, the white male and all that if a child or a person in your life says, I might as well just kill myself, we have to pay attention to that?
And what are they saying?
And not be afraid to have that conversation, because sometimes I think, suicide is it's like, oh, you don't take it, take it apart, You
Right.
know, break it down, look at it, you know.
And I think too, a lot of people will respond, "Oh, you don't really mean that," because suicide is a very uncomfortable subject to talk about in a family.
Yeah.
But they mean something. It may not mean they want to die, but something is happening
Right,
that's causing them.
Because sometimes I know when I'm working with people, I'll say, is it that you want to be, you know, not be here anymore, or you want relief from this pain?
Right.
And they very often will say it's the relief.
What relief?
So what do we suggest for parents or anybody who's got someone in their life who's saying these things?
I think bringing them to a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at best, bringing them at least to the family doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Who can suggest a therapist? Maybe get some medication
Mm-hmm.
to get them started, and hopefully get everybody into therapy in the family system to see what's going on. And
Well, it sounds like you have to take it seriously.
absolutely,
You never dismiss it,
absolutely.
you know. And it sounds like also helping them feel supported.
Right.
Because a lot of times when you're depressed and you're hopeless, you're feeling like there's no way out.
Right.
So.
Right. And I'll always feel this way, but
Right.
you won't.
Right.
You won't always feel that way.
Yeah. I remember a therapist that I worked with once saying, she would hold the hope for her clients.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe they're not hopeful right now. They're
Mm-hmm.
feeling so hopeless, but she'll hold on to the hope for them
Right.
until they're ready.
Right.
And she'll, so I thought that was a nice idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're there for
Right.
them.
To say, I have hope for you.
Right.
Right.
I'll hold that hope.
Right.
You just keep on, keep on going.
Right.
I've got the hope. You may not believe in the hope right now, but yeah.
Thanks for watching, guys. Comment, like, and subscribe. We'll leave links down below for you to check out. And join us in our next video when Melinda and I tackle a new subject.